Hello, U.S. history students. So this is the first lesson for this week. Now, where we left off before break, the differences between the North and the South are becoming more pronounced. And the South is getting closer and closer to breaking off of the Union, okay? We are getting closer and closer to civil war. And that's where our focus is going to be, is finally this final push to civil war this week. That's what we're going to be looking at. Now, before we get to the actual war itself, the actual division, there's a couple of events, once again, that are going to put us on that road to disunion and war. As you listen to these notes, as you listen to this presentation, there's a PowerPoint of notes that go along with it, and you can certainly use that to fill in the missing information, or you can take notes on your own, whatever's easiest on you. But there are a couple key things that we need to talk about here that are putting us on this road to war. Okay, now before we talk about some specific people, namely Abraham Lincoln, Stephen Douglas, and Dred Scott, we got to review a couple things about the South. Number one, the South believes it can nullify laws passed by Congress. This goes back to Andrew Jackson and the nullification crisis. Basically, the Southern states said if Congress or the president did something that they didn't like, then they could simply not do it. They could ignore it. Okay? Which means if a president wants to do something about slavery and the South doesn't like it, they can simply ignore the laws against slavery. Okay. And if they need to, they can disrupt the Union. They can break away, which leads us to our second point. The Southern states believed they had entered the Union freely and could leave freely if they chose. This leaving freely is a key term. That term is secede or secession. Okay. You're going to hear this a lot. It's going to be on a lot of quizzes. Hint, hint. The term secession means to leave the Union, okay, or to disrupt the Union, okay, for lack of a better term. But it is you freely choose to leave the Union. Okay, so that's important to remember that the South believes it can nullify any laws passed by Congress or the president that they don't like. They can simply ignore them. And if they need to, they can leave the Union freely. They had joined the Union freely, so they can leave the Union freely. And this act of leaving is called secession or to secede. Okay, so that's the background going into this. Now, 1858, there's an election year. It's a midterm election. Okay, it's not a presidential election, it's a midterm election. So there's a bunch of Senate seats open and there's a bunch of House seats open. And one of those Senate seats is in Illinois. Now, why in the world would the election of a Senate seat in Illinois garner national attention? Well, there are two people running, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. And they engage in a series of debates across Illinois called the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Very, very famous. During these debates, it comes out Lincoln, who is the new Republican candidate. There's a new Republican Party that has emerged, okay? Lincoln is the Republican candidate, and he is very much on the side of anti-slavery. So 1858, we got the Senate race. You have Lincoln, who's the Republican. He is very, very much anti-slavery. Now, by anti-slavery, what he means is he does not want to see slavery spread into the new territories. He does not want to see it spread to any new place where it's not already. Nobody is talking about getting rid of slavery. That's important, okay? Nobody is talking about getting rid of slavery. Lincoln just doesn't want to see it spread. On the opposite side, you have Stephen Douglas, who's the Democrat, okay? And more specifically, he's a Northern Democrat. More on that later. He believes in popular sovereignty. And we talked about popular sovereignty with the compromises, especially the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Let the people decide. Okay, Stephen Douglas is a big believer. Let the people decide. If people don't want to have slavery, they don't have to have it. If they do want it, they can have it. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln, the Republican, anti-slavery, I don't want to see it spread. Stephen Douglas, the Democrat, more specifically the Northern Democrat, believes in popular sovereignty. Let the people decide. Okay, the people can choose. Now, when the votes are counted, Douglas wins. Okay, Douglas wins, Lincoln loses. But their debates brought the issue of slavery to the American political forefront. Okay, more and more people are beginning to pay attention to the slavery issue. And like I said, even though Lincoln loses, okay, his popularity among abolitionists is going to grow because even though he's not talking about getting rid of slavery, they see somebody who is anti slavery. And we're going to hear more from Lincoln in 2 years because in 1860, there's going to be another election, but this time it's going to be for the presidency. And Lincoln, not only does this issue come to the political forefront, namely slavery, but Lincoln has made a name for himself as being an honest person and being a person committed to his ideals, but a person who is willing to work with people of different backgrounds. Okay. But he's committed to his ideals and he wants to see those ideals win the day. So, 1860, we get a presidential election. Lincoln once again is running against Stephen Douglas. Actually, there are four candidates in the election of 1860. Lincoln is the Republican candidate. Stephen Douglas is the Northern Democratic candidate. You have John C. Breckinridge, who is the Southern Democratic candidate, and John Bell, who's a member of the Constitutional Union Party. Okay, it's a fourth party out there. When you think about the Southern Democrats and Northern Democrats and the Republicans, it's a fourth party out there. So Lincoln is running not only against Stephen Douglas, but John C. Breckinridge and John Bell. Okay. This time, because the Democrats are split between the Northern candidate and the Southern candidate, Douglas is not able to get enough support. Neither is John C. Breckinridge. Okay. Breckinridge doesn't get it either. Lincoln gets enough popular support to win the election, and Lincoln becomes president in 1860. Okay, now he's the Republican president. He is the 16th president of the United States. Keep that in the back of your mind. He's the 16th president of the United States. He does not carry a single state in the South. He only wins with the northern states. In fact, his name doesn't even appear on the ballot in the South. Okay, so he wins, but he wins with the northern vote. Okay? Now, in 1858, when he was running for the Senate, he gave a very, very famous speech. And in that speech, he quoted the Bible. He said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Jesus used this terminology in the Bible. People were accusing him of being from Satan. And Jesus said, "I'm not from Satan. How can Satan be against Satan? How can Satan drive out demons?" And he likens it to a house divided against itself cannot stand. Okay? Lincoln uses this quote and he says, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." What's he talking about? He is talking about the issue of slavery. The nation cannot continue to be half free and half slave. It'll either have to be one of the other, it'll either have to be this one or the other. All or nothing is basically what Lincoln is saying. And we know that Lincoln is anti slavery. So when he wins the election in 1860, when he becomes the 16th president of the United States, the South begins to freak out because he's anti-slavery. And he said the House cannot stay divided. Okay. A house divided cannot stand. All right. So the South begins to freak out. And when Lincoln is elected, South Carolina is the first state to secede. Lincoln is elected in November of 1860. By December of 1860, South Carolina has seceded. 5 other deep southern states are going to follow, okay? And they're going to form a new nation, the Confederate States of America. And they're going to elect a new president, a president of their own, Jefferson Davis. Okay, but more on that in the next election, or I'm sorry, in the next lesson. Okay, so but you need to know Lincoln's 16th president, South Carolina is the first to secede, and the Confederate States choose Jefferson Davis as their president. Back in 1858, what Lincoln did not know He said a nation cannot continue to survive as half free or half slave. He is predicting the upcoming Civil War. Okay? Like I said, the South knows he's anti-slavery, even though he's saying, I don't want to get rid of slavery where it already exists, but I am going to stop it from spreading. He then goes on to say, a house divided against itself cannot stand. We cannot continue to be half free and half slave. His election means the upcoming Civil War. Okay? In fact, Lincoln's election is the event that starts the Civil War because it gets those 6 deep southern states to secede, and we're going to be at war. Okay? Now, there's another important thing that happens during this time period. It doesn't really deal with politics so much, okay? But there's a very important court case in front of the Supreme Court, okay? We got a new Chief Justice. His name is Roger Taney. And he is hearing the case of a man by the name of Dred Scott, okay? Dred Scott was born into slavery. His master took him to Illinois, which was a free state. And they lived there for a number of years. His master then took him to Missouri, which was a slave state. And Scott sued for his freedom. He said, because we were living in Illinois and Illinois doesn't have slavery, I should be free. Okay? Even though we moved to Missouri, which is a slave state, I should be freed in Illinois. And he sues for his freedom. Well, in the case of Dred Scott, the Supreme Court basically eventually rules against Scott, okay? And they pass a very disheartening verdict. Chief Justice Taney, in ruling, not only does he say Scott is not free, but he says we shouldn't have heard the case in the first place because Scott is a slave and slaves have no rights. And since slaves have no rights, they are not protected by the Constitution. And the Constitution says slaves can have, the Constitution says people have the right to trial, et cetera, the right to juries, et cetera, the right to freedoms, et cetera. But since slaves are property, not people, they have no rights. And since they have no rights, they're not protected by the Constitution. Thus, Dred Scott shouldn't even be able to sue for his freedom, and we shouldn't be hearing this case in the first place because slaves are property, not people. They have no rights, and they're not protected by the Constitution. This ruling was a huge victory for slavery and slave owners because, like I said, it said slaves were property, not people. It was also a huge loss for abolitionists, for people in the North that didn't like slavery, and for the slaves themselves. This is going to set them back in their quest to gain freedom, which is why the emergence of Lincoln is so important, because here's a man that is convicted to stopping the spread of slavery and has said the country can't be half free and half slave and survive. So even though we have this ruling in this Supreme Court case, there is hope with President Lincoln. Okay, maybe we can start to turn things around. So in a nutshell, that's going to be it. That's going to be the catalyst. Lincoln's election is the catalyst for the Civil War. And in the lessons that follow this week, we're going to be investigating more of this division in the country, and eventually we are going to get into fighting the war, and we're going to talk about the early years of the war by the time we get to the end of this week.